Welcome to this session. As you can see, a little bit of musical chairs getting the session together, but I think we're in a very, very good place right now. And as I was saying to Vali earlier, well, sorry, a very good place might not be the right way to start this session. As the best description, given the title, Middle East Conflict, What is the Endgame? But I'm very pleased to have Vali Nasser sitting over there, because we'll get extra benefit of his insights, which will be incredibly important. And just to let you know, you will need your translation devices if you don't speak Arabic at certain moments of this session, so please make sure you have that ready. As you know, we've got about 45 minutes for this session. It's on the record, I see. Yes, be aware of that as well. Let me do a very quick introduction of the panelists that we have here. And then I'll come back a little bit to how we're going to run it and some of the topics we want to cover in this very tight 45 minutes for such a big subject. On my immediate left, Major General Adiris Al-Zubaydi. Pleasure to have you with us, Sir, Vice President of the Presidential Leadership Council of Yemen, the internationally recognized government. To his left, Geir Pedersen, the UN Special Envoy for Syria. But as we were discussing earlier, he's had a lot of roles in the region, including the special representative for the government, for the UN to Lebanon, member of the Oslo negotiating team, has been Norway's special representative to the UN, also ambassador to China at one point as well. So he will get a lot of questions, I'm sure, and discussion here. I'm going to say my colleague, Dr. Karen von Hippel, as she is the Director General of the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, but has a very important experience as concerns this topic. Used to work at CSIS in Washington, my own alma mater as well, and was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Conflict and Stabilization Operations in the US State Department, Chief of Staff to General John Allen when he was President's Envoy to countering ISIL, and Professor Vali Nasser, who is a professor at the Paul Nitze School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins, former dean, author, and will really give us, I think, excellent insights, not just on the region, but also obviously on Iran. I want to be able to move through this subject. Let me just do a frame setting 2 comments for all of you. The first would be, we've got this title, What is the Endgame? But I think the endgame at the moment is this conflict spreading, clearly, or is it escalating? Yeah? Because a lot of the things that are happening at the moment, including kidnapping or taking of vessels, hitting of vessels in the Straits of Hormuz, these are things that have happened in the past. Yemen has been in a civil war for a very long time. But it's like all of these things are happening simultaneously. Is it spread or is it escalation that we really need to worry about? And I just wonder if you can keep that theme in mind. And then towards the end of this session, to what is likely to be the end game. Can we see a future that is stable? Can we see a future that is peaceful? 2 very different kinds of end games, because just a few months ago, prior to October the 7th, the sense was this was a region moving towards potentially longer term stability. So with those points in mind, let me turn first to you, Sir, Mr. Al-Zubaydi. Let's start with the first example of spread or escalation, which is the situation in Yemen. The US and some of its allies have done strikes against the Houthi rebels who've struck ships passing through the Straits up through to the Red Sea. Do you think this is going to be successful? Is it raising the prospect of an escalation of the conflict in Yemen? Or is this going to hit a new normal where one just has to worry, the Red Sea becomes a very unpredictable route? What's your sense of the current situation? And do you think these strikes are going to make a difference? Is it going to escalate, or can we hit some type of stability?
In the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful, thank you very much. With regards to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the Houthi militia are causing an escalation, and this is affecting the humanitarian situation in Yemen. Most of the Yemeni population rely heavily on imports, up to 80 or 90%. So the population is suffering greatly. And what the Houthi militias have perpetrated is unacceptable. And I think what the US and the UK have done is very good, and this is what was needed, and we really think that this should have been done. I think that such an escalation will cause an escalation of the crisis. The United States and the UK and the international community are called upon to keep on adopting this strategy and to put an end to the violations perpetrated by the Houthi militias. And I think that this is separate from what is taking place in Palestine. I think that they are trying to increase their populism. What is happening in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait needs to be given due attention because this is an international strait. It should be protected by the international community. We shouldn't allow for any escalation by the Houthis.
Follow up with one question. I mean, it was notable that the UN resolution that took place just beforehand was not unanimous, but there was abstentions from Russia, from China, about being deeply critical of the actions of the Houthis, telling them to stop. But countries in the region, including Saudi Arabia, maybe UAE, seem to be more cautious about the kind of military actions that the US and the UK are taking. Do you think how aligned do you believe your allies in the region, in the Gulf region, are with the military action being undertaken by the US and UK in particular with the support of their allies?
I think that the US allies in the region had witnessed attacks in the past, namely Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The US and the UK have a good role to play today, and when the oil fields were bombarded in the past, the allies in the region had suffered greatly. So it's important to make sure that these infrastructure attacks are avoided.
Thank you very much. Let me just keep moving down the line. Geir, I'm talking about, certainly spread versus escalation. If you have something to say on the Yemen question, please do just come in on the back of the comments. But the other part of the world that we're looking at, or the region, where this threat of escalation and spread is very live, obviously, is in southern Lebanon and potentially into Syria. It looks as if the Israeli government is going to want sort of two buffers. A buffer somehow around Gaza, but probably now the implementation of the UN resolutions to have a true buffer so it can move its citizens back to northern Israel. How worried are you about sort of spread, where there is some violence, there's already shelling taking place, or escalation? What's your take on that part of the world? And anything you want to say on Yemen, obviously, we welcome.
I'm extremely worried. I think we have both seen spread and escalation. You know, if we look at the situation since the 7th of October, we have seen what we before the 7th of October would have called a warlike situation between Israel and Hezbollah. We have seen both the spread and escalation in Syria. We have seen dozens of attacks on US positions inside of Syria from what the US claim are Iranian-supported groups. Of course, the Iranians are very clear they have nothing to do with them. Then we have seen a few US attacks against these groups. Then we have seen some of these groups attacking Israeli positions in occupied Golan. And we have seen Israeli attacks against these groups and some Syrian government positions in Syria, and increased Israeli attacks on different airports and positions inside of Syria. So the war is spreading. It's been an escalation. The question is now, can we contain it? Right. My opinion, but this is an opinion, and it's to be challenged, is that I do believe the Iranians do not want further escalation. I think they're playing with fire. I think it's pretty clear Hezbollah do not want a full-scale war. As you alluded to, I was a UN envoy to Lebanon in 2006 and negotiated Security Council Resolution 1701, who is now sort of what we are discussing when it comes to the full implementation of that in Lebanon. Several details on that I will not go into, but I think the question is what you said, and that is, will the Israelis stop in Gaza, or will it develop further? Again, my personal opinion, this is also very clear that the Americans do not want this, but the question is, can the Israelis be contained? So I think for this to happen, we need a quick end to the war in Gaza. We need humanitarian assistance, and then we need to develop a strategy that is not only, and I know this is a tall order, but a strategy that do not only include Israel, Palestine, but the broader region. And later on, I have several ideas when it comes to this.
Well, wonderful if we can come back to this. Just one quick question. This whole language of proxies and not proxies of Iran, how do you read the sense of independence of action of Hezbollah today compared to, let's say, previous years? Obviously reinforced by the very important role they played in upholding the Assad government in Syria. Heavily armed and increasingly armed, involved in the government in Lebanon. How much do you feel that Hezbollah has room for maneuver separate from Iran? And to what extent is it having to uphold its own position as the axis of resistance to retain its credibility inside Lebanon? In other words, is the escalation taking it beyond where it would like to go?
I'm going to say I'm dealing with the Iranians more or less on a daily basis. I do believe that obviously there is a very close relationship between Hezbollah and Iran. I think Iran accepts that Hezbollah is in its own right also a political entity in Lebanon that needs to make its own decisions.
Right.
But I do believe where we are now, today, this is a decision whether to go to a full-scale war or not. It's not a decision Hezbollah can make alone.
Right.
And that has to do, in my opinion, with the fact, of course, that Hezbollah is also, for the Iranians, a deterrence.
Yeah.
And the question is, when do you use and when do you not use that deterrence?
Yeah. And you certainly don't want to lose it if you're Iran.
Indeed.
And have it destroyed or hit.
Yes.
Thank you. Karen, let me come to you. I mean, you've got a lot of experience in the region. You've got a lot of experience on US policymaking in the region and how they engage and do not engage here. Obviously, the US involved almost in all aspects of this conflict, involved in leading the military operation in the Red Sea, involved very much in what the future will be in the Hezbollah situation, obviously involved in Gaza and trying to put pressure on Israel. How do you think they're managing these risks of escalation? Which are their biggest areas of concern? How are they prioritizing them at the moment? Yeah, just share your thoughts on this.
Sure. Thank you, Robin, and thanks for inviting me to join today. Look, in some ways, I think people overestimate what the United States can do in the region. Many people think that somehow Israel is like the 51st state. And of course, it's not. It's an independent country, and the U.S. does what it can to put pressure on Israel, but it doesn't control what Israel does. I'm always surprised when I listen to the news and people say, well, the U.S. needs to do this to tell Israel this and that. But there is a lot to be worried about. I know the Americans behind the scenes have been working quite hard on not just pulling the coalition together to fight the Houthis or to push back on and protect shipping in the Red Sea, but also to prevent a wider war in Lebanon later. I mean, don't forget, there are about 100,000 Israelis in hotels, Israelis who live on the border with Lebanon, and they will need security before they can go home. And this is why I'm concerned that Israel's plans are once the fighting with Gaza is over, a bit of retrenchment, and then they will have to, if they feel that they're still insecure, they may feel they have to go to war, at least on that border area. And so that is a big concern. I know that at the same time, the U.S. is playing a pretty significant role in trying to prevent that from happening diplomatically.
The U.S. forces that are dotted around the region, we've kind of forgotten that you have these elements still there, unless you're an expert following what's going on in the region. Are they now almost sort of hostages to escalation? Or do you think they're important touch points that allow the U.S. to try to calibrate preventing escalation while managing spread, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, I see it as a deterrence. And if you listen to the language, even yesterday with Jake Sullivan, he kept talking about deterrence and de-escalation. I agree with Gara that Hezbollah, Iran, the United States, none of them want to expand this war, but you don't know what might prevent or what might provoke a country to do more. I mean, I was even surprised this morning. I woke up at 3 a.m. somehow, and I wasn't even sure this was true, but Avali will share that Iran sent some missiles into Pakistan, which is, you know, that's a strange potential escalation. Anything like this could blow the region out of proportion and make it much more difficult. But at the same time, let's not forget that, you know, at least over the last decade, pretty much the majority of the countries in that region have been involved in some sort of civil war or regional war, whether it's Syria, Libya, Yemen, Qatar versus Saudi, troubles within Lebanon. And all of those conflicts have involved external forces supporting militaries and militias inside, and yet none of those did spill over. So I do think everyone is very conscious of what war looks like, because it wasn't so long ago that so many of these countries were dealing with that, and no one wants to go back to that.
Thank you, Karen. Vali, so many questions about the Iranian thinking and position at a time of, yes, a leadership transition potentially coming down the pike in Iran itself. But it strikes me that with the deal that had been done under Chinese auspices with Saudi Arabia, Iran was heading to a sort of place where there was a different future, one in which it was tacitly observing the JCPOA to kind of limit its nuclear enrichment, in which maybe there was some type of economic future for itself connected to China, maybe to Russia, maybe as in a more stable Gulf region. All of that is gone, it looks at the moment, or is it? So the question to you, is Iran welcoming? How is it able to use this moment? Is this a moment that it's trying to put the lid on because the old future is the one that they want to get back to, one of stability? Or is it a tiger they're having to ride that they have very little control over? How do you think the Iranians see the situation right now?
I mean, I think their read of it would be, and not only them, but also the rest of the axis of resistance, but also I think other governments in the region, that the old order is basically shattered. October 7th essentially ended the order that, you know, Saudi Arabia was thinking about normalization with Israel, was thinking about a shiny economic boom in the Gulf. You know, that whole order has fallen apart, not just because of...
Before it ever emerged.
Before it ever emerged. But if we went back to October 6th, as Gar said, we would see a very different Middle East. Now, the new order isn't there, and I think the Iranians, Hezbollah, everybody is trying to sort of gain this. And as you mentioned at the very beginning, and Ger put it very well, we're seeing both escalation and spread of conflict. And I think the Iranians are trying to manage this. And it's important to note sort of what are they looking at and why they're acting the way they are. First of all, the war itself is escalating. So long as Gaza war is not ended, it's not de-escalating. And the next shoe is going to fall when, you know, the humanitarian crisis really hits hard. And so long as the United States and Europeans, etc., don't have any plan for ending this war, and Israel is not ready to do it, we are in an escalatory mode. So we shouldn't kid ourselves. Right. The war is ongoing. It's going through phases. It's not bombing. It's not starvation. It's now humanitarian crisis.
Yep.
So that's escalating. Secondly, I know in the region is very firm belief that the killing of the Hamas leader in Beirut essentially ended an unwritten agreement that existed between Hezbollah and Israel that they would not attack one another's capitals. So I think Hezbollah's view is actually that Israel is coming for it in a very big way. So it's not about whether Iran pushes the button. Hezbollah itself is increasingly in a survival mode. So it's not about just acting on Iran's behalf. And we're also not out of the woods. I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu keeps saying that Hezbollah needs to go, above the Litani River, and then he's going to ask for more things. It's not like they're going to stop if Hezbollah were even to go north of Litani River. As Gar said, we've seen now much more direct U.S. involvement in Iraq and Syria and in Yemen. I think we are on a path for U.S. ending up in a war in Yemen. Blood has been drawn. The scale of attacks is there. The Houthis are not going to back down now, and we're heading in that direction. And also, Iraq may end up in a war. I mean, there's one of these missile exchanges between U.S. and Iran that could, go wrong, and somebody can get killed, and we're going to be in a very different space. And even if nobody gets killed, if these continue, I think the stability of the Iraqi government and the Iraqi system is now in question. That can Iraq survive an escalated Iran-United States confrontation? And then I would say it's not just that this conflict is spreading, conflict is spreading. And so in the past, since we arrived in Davos, Iran has hit Erbil. Iran has hit Pakistan. Just before we arrived, Iran captured the oil tanker on the Gulf, and Iran's nuclear program is now going to accelerate. Now, these are not technically, you would say, Gaza, but definitely Iran is opening new fronts. And at the same time, there was also a massive bomb that went off in Iran, killing about 100 people. And even though officially, I think the Iranians accepted that it was ISIS, because that sort of gives them cover not to have to react. But I think they don't believe that this is coincidental, that ISIS would carry out this attack in Iran right in the middle of the Gaza war. And so the real question is, what's their end game? And I think, for Iran and Hezbollah and now increasingly Houthis, they don't want Israel and the United States to dictate the pace of the Gaza war. Israel finished Gaza on its own schedule, and then decide what's going to happen after, and then decide what they're going to do with Hezbollah, and then what they're going to do with Houthis, and decide the end game, as you put it. So in a way, I don't think, sometimes we could become prisoner of our own words to talk about escalation, suggests that, you could also see one man's escalation is another man's deterrence. And one man's escalation, I think the Iranians and Hezbollah want to deny Israel and the United States the ability to dictate what's the new order that's going to emerge in the Middle East. And I think they're opening as many fronts at the same time in order to deny Israel and the United States that capability. I mean, we constantly talk about Houthi-Iranian relationship, but it's very important to note Houthis are very close to Hezbollah. In some ways, more close to Hezbollah than they are to Iran, and that the Houthi escalation actually got into full gear after the Israeli assassination of the Hamas leader. In other words, once Hezbollah came to a belief that an expansion of war into Lebanon looks imminent, and Israel has now put aside the 2006 agreement, the Houthis opened the Red Sea front. And so there is a logic here more than just wanton escalation.
We can see it's going to be so difficult to do justice to all of these topics in the very limited time. I see we've got 20 minutes left, and I do want to leave 10 minutes for some questions. So please, those of you who've got some ideas, please have them ready and have them short and to the point, which would be very helpful. Let me turn back to you, Ustaz Rubaidi, Vice President. Let's get to the endgame question. What do you think this conflict is going to do to the future of Yemen? What will happen to the future of Yemen if, as we've heard from everyone here, the situation sounds like we're still in the escalation ladder? What does this mean for the future of Yemen, specifically?
The future of Yemen, with the continuous escalation of the Houthis, will be a humanitarian crisis that is unprecedented. This is why I call upon the international community and the United States to form coalitions to protect Bab el-Mandab Strait, because it is an international corridor and from which many countries benefit. As for the Houthis, we need to find a strategy to deter them completely in all political, economic, and military levels, because their presence is a threat to the whole region in general.
And are you worried about an intensification of civil war inside the region as well? Inside Yemen, I mean.
Well, of course, there are governors that were liberated by the government, the legal government, and we have struggles, and perhaps it will come back to become two countries instead of one if the Houthis will continue escalation in Bab el-Mandab.
And part of what the Houthis seem to have done is they are strengthening their credibility within Yemen and the region by supporting the Palestinian cause, should we say, certainly supporting the people in Gaza. Does that make life more difficult in a way for the Transitional Leadership Council?
On the contrary, the Houthis are trying to invest and to cover up their humanitarian crimes through their standing up with the Gazan and the Palestinian people. They're trying to take advantage. They're trying to invest in the lives of the Palestinians, the people of Gaza. We know that this is not their specialization. There is a Palestinian state that will take care of them.
Thank you very much. A very clear answer.
Kerajaan melaksanakan audit subsidi